It started with a strange draft that never seemed to go away, even when all the windows were closed. What seemed like a minor household nuisance turned into something far darker when a few neighbors discovered there was more to their HOA president's obsession with property inspections than anyone realized. What hid behind the walls of those houses would unravel the terrifying secret life of Karen, the woman who ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist. The neighborhood of Willow Creek was the kind of place where everything looked perfect from the outside. Rows of identical two-story homes lined the freshly paved streets, each house painted in muted tones approved by the HOA, each lawn trimmed to exactly 3 inches, and each driveway free of any unsightly clutter. From afar, it was the picture of suburban tranquility, the type of place families dreamed about when flipping through glossy real estate brochures. But if you lived there long enough, you began to sense that beneath the polished image, something wasn't right. The perfection wasn't organic. It was enforced, controlled, and suffocating. And the epicenter of that control was one woman, Karen McAllister, the president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. Karen was the kind of HOA president who made it her life's mission to ensure that everyone followed the rules she often interpreted and bent to her will. She was always watching. Neighbors whispered that she never really slept. Her blinds would flicker open at odd hours, her silhouette framed in the upstairs window as though she was on patrol. Some joked that she had cameras hidden in the trees, but most laughed nervously when they said it, because deep down, they weren't sure it was a joke. It started small, as most unsettling things do. People noticed little oddities around their homes. A faint noise in the walls that wasn't the usual creak of settling wood, but something sharper, like a faint tapping or scratching. Drafts that seemed to flow in from nowhere, as if air was sneaking through hidden cracks. Pets growled at empty corners. Tools left in garages disappeared and then reappeared days later in strange places. It was easy to brush these off as coincidences, but when enough coincidences piled up, neighbors began trading stories over fences and during evening walks. The unease didn't only come from the houses. It came from Karen herself. She had a way of making people feel exposed, as if she knew more than she should. She'd casually mention the exact time someone came home from work, or how many times their child had ridden a bike past the cul-de-sac that week. If a delivery truck stopped at a house, Karen would appear at the doorstep minutes later, asking unnecessary questions about what was ordered. Her knowledge of everyone's daily routines was unsettling, but people dismissed it, at least outwardly. After all, she was the HOA president. Maybe she just paid closer attention. But inside their homes, families couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. The Johnsons were among the first to notice something was truly off. Mark Johnson, a construction worker, came home one evening to find his wife pale and shaken. She told him she heard footsteps upstairs while she was in the kitchen. Their teenage daughter swore she heard whispering in the walls late at night, like someone speaking through a vent. At first, Mark brushed it off. Old houses made noise. But Willow Creek wasn't old. The homes were only 10 years old, designed to be modern and efficient. And yet the Johnsons' house groaned and sighed as though it held secrets within its framework. Next came the Garcias. They were renovating their basement when they discovered an odd patch of drywall that didn't match the rest. When Luis Garcia knocked on it, it sounded hollow. He thought maybe it was just an unused utility space, but when he mentioned it to Karen during a casual conversation, her reaction chilled him. She stiffened, her smile faltering for just a fraction of a second before she quickly changed the subject. Luis didn't push it at the time, but later that night, he couldn't shake the image of her face. Stories like these rippled quietly through the neighborhood. People didn't want to speak too loudly about their fears. After all, Karen had a reputation for retaliation. A complaint about her leadership might lead to fines for the smallest infractions: grass half an inch too long, a trash can left visible for 10 minutes too many. a car parked with one tire touching the curb. Speaking out carried consequences. But silence didn't erase the unease that clung to Willow Creek like a fog. The most disturbing incident came from the Morgans, a family that lived 3 houses down from Karen herself. Emily Morgan, a school teacher, woke one night to the sound of her toddler crying. She went to his room only to find the child staring at the wall, pointing and whispering, "Lady." Emily tried to soothe him, telling him it was just a dream. But the next night, it happened again. This time, she put her ear to the wall and froze. She swore she heard a faint shuffle, like someone moving just on the other side. But there was no other side, just drywall, insulation, and the brick exterior. When Emily confided in a neighbor, she was told to keep quiet. "Don't let Karen hear about it," the neighbor warned. "She doesn't like when people talk about the houses." The phrase itself was strange, unsettling in its vagueness. What did it mean? What about the houses? But no one wanted to elaborate. It became clear that Karen's grip on Willow Creek wasn't just administrative, it was psychological. People lived under her rules, but more disturbingly, they lived under her gaze. The odd noises in the walls, the strange drafts, the hollow patches of drywall, all of it tied into the larger sense that Karen was involved somehow. She was always nearby when things happened, always watching just a little too closely. By the end of that summer, whispers of secret rooms began circulating. It started as a joke at a block party. Someone mentioned the Garcia's hollow wall and laughed, saying maybe Karen was hiding treasure or bodies. The laughter was nervous, cut short when they noticed Karen standing only a few feet away, staring silently with her wine glass poised in her hand. She didn't smile, she didn't laugh, she just stared until the group fell silent. Then she walked away. The moment burned into everyone's memory. After that, the joke wasn't funny anymore. It felt like a warning. The discovery of hidden walls. The first real discovery came almost by accident. It was late September when Luis Garcia decided to finish the basement he had been putting off since they debought the house. His wife, Marisol, had been urging him to create a proper playroom for the kids. Something warm and inviting instead of the cold, concrete space they had been using as storage. Luis finally gave in, bought drywall, insulation, and paint, and spent a weekend knocking out what he thought would be a straightforward project. But when he started measuring the basement, something didn't add up. He had the original floor plans on file, and according to them, the back wall should have lined up perfectly with the exterior of the house. Instead, there was a discrepancy, about 3 feet of space missing between where the interior wall ended and where the outer brick foundation should have been. At first, Luis thought it was a simple misprint in the blueprints, but as he tapped on the wall, he froze. The sound was hollow. It wasn't the solid thud of a foundation wall. It was light, almost like tapping on an empty drum. Curiosity prickled at the back of his neck. He grabbed a small hammer and gave it a harder knock. The echo that came back confirmed his suspicion. There was space behind the wall. "Marisol!" he called. She came downstairs, wiping her hands on a towel, her expression curious. Luis pointed at the wall. "Listen to this." She leaned in, tapped it herself, and frowned. "That's not right." They stood there, staring at the wall, their minds racing with possibilities. An unfinished crawl space? A utility gap? But 3 feet of wasted space in a house this new? It didn't make sense. Luis's curiosity got the better of him. He fetched a utility knife, cut a small hole, and pulled back a square of drywall. Dust billowed out, coating his hands. He shone a flashlight inside, and his stomach dropped. There was indeed a hidden cavity about the size of a small hallway. But what unsettled him most wasn't the space itself. It was what was inside. A folding chair sat in the narrow room, positioned directly against the interior wall, as if someone had been sitting there, listening. Next to it was a small stack of notebooks, each one filled with dense handwriting. Luis reached in, his hands trembling, and pulled one out. The pages were filled with meticulous notes, observations about his family. Children play outside at 3:15. Marisol goes to grocery store. Listen to phone call about her sister. Luis works late, argued on phone with boss. The entries went back months. Marisol gasped when she saw them. "Oh my God, Luis, someone's been watching us." He shoved the notebook back into the hidden space, slammed the drywall square over the hole, and pressed his forehead against the wall, his heart pounding. His first thought was to call the police. But then another thought crept in. Karen. She always knew too much about everyone. She always showed up at the strangest times. Could it be possible? The Garcias didn't tell anyone at first. Fear gnawed at them. If Karen truly was behind this, they didn't know how far her influence went. She ran the HOA with an iron fist. And neighbors had seen firsthand what happened to people who crossed her. Fines, harassment, endless inspections, even threats of foreclosure. If she could manipulate the association to that extent, who was to say she didn't have control in other ways? Instead of speaking up, Luis quietly sealed the hole and said nothing, even to his children. But the discovery haunted him. Every creak in the house, every unexplained draft, every faint sound behind the walls now felt sinister. Across the neighborhood, others were making similar discoveries, though few dared to talk about them openly. The Johnsons were the next. Mark Johnson had been repairing a leak under the upstairs bathroom when he noticed something odd, a vent that didn't seem to connect to any ductwork. It was small, tucked behind a cabinet, and at first, he thought it was just a builder's mistake. But when he peered inside with a flashlight, he realized the vent didn't lead anywhere. It simply opened into a narrow, empty chamber between walls, and in that chamber was a small camera. His hands shook as he unscrewed the vent cover and pulled it out. It wasn't a professional setup, just a cheap, battery-powered camera, the kind you could buy online for under $100. But it was positioned perfectly, aimed through a slit in the drywall that gave it a direct view of the bathroom. Mark's stomach churned. His wife and daughter used that bathroom every day. Someone had been watching them. He destroyed the camera immediately, smashing it with a wrench until it was nothing but plastic shards. But when his wife asked where the banging noise came from, he didn't have the courage to tell her the truth. That night, as he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, he thought of Karen. She had fined them 3 times that summer for improper trash storage. Each time she had photographs that were taken at angles, suggesting they were captured from inside his own yard. Could she really be the one planting these devices? The thought burrowed deep, and once it was there, it wouldn't leave. By October, word had spread in whispers. Families compared notes carefully, always making sure no one was listening too closely. One neighbor had found what looked like a hidden door behind a false panel in the attic, though he hadn't been brave enough to open it. Another swore she heard footsteps inside the walls at night. Pets refused to go into certain rooms. Children spoke of shadows and voices in their houses. But the most disturbing story came from Emily Morgan, the same woman whose toddler had pointed at the wall and said, "Lady." Emily finally decided to investigate. One afternoon, while her husband was at work, she brought a ladder into the hallway closet and knocked on the ceiling panel that led into the attic. With trembling hands, she pushed it open and climbed inside. The attic was dusty, filled with insulation and beams, but as she crawled deeper, she noticed something strange, a section of the wall that didn't belong. The wood framing stopped, then started again several feet later, leaving an odd gap in between. She pressed her ear against it and nearly screamed. There was breathing on the other side, not the faint sound of air through vents, not the hum of pipes, but slow, steady breathing. Emily scrambled backward, her knees scraping against the wood, her heart hammering. She clambered down the ladder, slammed the closet door shut, and locked it, though she knew a lock wouldn't matter if something, or someone, was inside. When her husband came home that evening, she begged him to check. But when they both climbed into the attic together, the wall was silent. No breathing, no sound at all, just the hollow, empty gap that didn't belong. Her husband tried to reassure her, but Emily knew what she had heard. Someone was up there. That was only the beginning. Karen's web of control. The realization spread slowly, like cracks forming in the foundation of a house. First came the unease, then came the discoveries. But the most chilling phase of all was the dawning understanding that none of it was random. The hollow walls, the vents that led nowhere, the notebooks of surveillance, these weren't accidents and they weren't coincidences. They were part of something deliberate, something designed, something controlled. And at the center of it all was Karen McAllister. She had always been obsessive, that much was clear. But once neighbors began comparing their experiences, they saw the pattern emerge like a map. Every strange discovery, every eerie coincidence, every moment they felt watched could be traced back to her. She wasn't just enforcing HOA rules. She was constructing a system of power far more invasive than anyone had imagined. The Garcias finally broke their silence. At a late-night gathering in their backyard, Luis whispered to the Johnsons about the notebooks. He showed them one page he had ripped out, and Mark Johnson went pale when he read it. The notes weren't just casual observations, they were records of arguments, private conversations, and intimate details no outsider should have known. "She knew things she couldn't possibly know," Luis muttered. "And now I know how. She's been inside our walls." Mark hesitated, then admitted what he had found. The camera hidden behind the vent, aimed into the bathroom. His wife still didn't know. He had been too ashamed, too horrified. But as he told the Garcias, his voice cracked with fury. "This isn't just spying," he said. "This is perversion, control. She's violating every boundary we have." Emily Morgan joined in next, recounting the breathing she had heard behind her attic wall. When she described the slow, steady rhythm, everyone shivered. The possibility that Karen herself, or someone working with her, was physically inside their homes made the air feel heavier, suffocating. From that night on, the neighbors began to view Karen differently. She wasn't just nosy anymore. She was dangerous. Karen's presence grew more sinister once people noticed how calculated her interactions were. It wasn't just her uncanny knowledge of schedules and deliveries. It was the way she used that knowledge to her advantage. When the Garcias argued one evening, their voices rising loud enough for the children to overhear, Karen appeared the very next day with a violation notice for domestic disturbance. There was no such clause in the HOA rules, but she had typed up a formal-looking document and slid it under their door anyway. Luis wanted to confront her, but Marisol stopped him. "She knows," she whispered. "She's telling us she knows." The Johnsons experienced it too. After Mark destroyed the bathroom camera, Karen fined them for property damage, a rule that didn't exist until she suddenly claimed it did. Attached to the notice was a photo of their daughter playing outside, taken from an angle that suggested it wasn't captured from the street. It was another message. "I can see her. I can see all of you." Emily Morgan noticed it in subtler ways. When she and her husband discussed refinancing their home, Karen casually mentioned interest rates the very next day. When Emily confided in a friend over the phone about her fears, Karen knocked on her door within the hour, carrying a plate of cookies and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just checking in," she said sweetly. "You seem troubled lately." It was a performance, neighborly concern masking something darker. Emily closed the door that day and broke down crying. "She's in our walls," she whispered. "She's in our lives." The web of control stretched wider than anyone realized. Karen had cultivated an image of authority for years, but now it was clear how she maintained it. She used the secret rooms not only for surveillance, but also for manipulation. The notebooks revealed more than observations. They contained strategies. Notes like, Johnson family argues often. Consider raising fines to increase stress. Garcias's children unsupervised in yard. Threaten report to child services. Morgan husband working late. Emily isolated, vulnerable. The words were clinical, almost like an experiment. She wasn't just watching them, she was studying them, learning their weaknesses and exploiting them. When neighbors began quietly comparing their HOA violation letters, they realized they weren't random at all. They were timed perfectly to strike when families were at their lowest, when stress was already high, when vulnerability was rawest. Karen wasn't enforcing rules. She was orchestrating pressure, driving wedges between spouses, isolating individuals, and keeping everyone off balance. The control wasn't just physical. It was psychological. One evening, Luis Garcia caught a glimpse of Karen standing across the street, staring at his house. Her face was calm, her hands clasped in front of her, but her gaze didn't waver. He stood at the window for nearly a full minute, waiting for her to move, but she never did. Finally, he closed the blinds, his heart racing. The next morning, he found a new violation notice in his mailbox. Curtains not consistent with HOA standards. He had no doubt it was punishment for closing the blinds. The Morgans faced a similar test. When Emily refused to attend the monthly HOA meeting, citing family illness, Karen arrived at their doorstep that night with a clipboard. "We need to discuss your noncompliance," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. Behind her smile, Emily saw a challenge. "Defy me and see what happens." Emily felt her chest tighten. She apologized, promised to attend the next one, and closed the door. That night, she whispered to her husband, "She knows everything, every choice we make. It's like she's pulling the strings." The fear escalated into paranoia. Neighbors stopped trusting their own homes. Every creak, every draft, every faint noise became suspect. Children were afraid to sleep in their rooms. Spouses argued about whether to move away, but the housing market was tight, and Karen had a reputation for interfering with sales she didn't approve of. Families felt trapped, not only inside their houses but inside Karen's system. The Johnsons tried to fight back. Mark installed new locks, sealed vents, and bought motion sensors for every room. But no matter what he did, Karen stayed one step ahead. When he covered one vent, a new violation letter arrived: unauthorized home modification. When he refused to pay the fine, Karen posted a notice on their lawn, visible to every passerby. "This property is in non-compliance with HOA regulations." It was public shaming, designed to isolate them from their neighbors, and it worked. People who had once waved when walking past now averted their eyes. "She's controlling all of us," Marisol whispered one night, "not just through the walls, through fear." The realization that Karen's control was deliberate and that it extended beyond simple spying was the most chilling discovery of all. They weren't just living in a neighborhood. They were living in a web, and every thread of that web led back to Karen. The shocking revelation: behind the walls. The breaking point came in November, on a night when the wind howled through Willow Creek and the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. By then, the families had been living under Karen's watchful eye for months, each discovery drawing them deeper into her web. But it was the Morgans who finally snapped. Emily had endured enough whispers, enough shadows, enough fear. Every time her toddler pointed at the walls, every time she woke in the night certain that someone was breathing in the attic, her resolve hardened. And when her husband finally agreed that something had to be done, they decided to act, not with whispers, not with half measures, but with destruction. On that stormy night, armed with nothing but a crowbar and a hammer, Emily and her husband began tearing down the wall in their basement. At first, it was just dust and splintered drywall, the sound muffled by the wind outside. But soon, as chunks of plaster gave way, a hollow cavity opened before them. Emily's flashlight beam cut through the dust, and both of them froze. Inside was not just an empty gap. It was a passage. A narrow corridor stretched sideways, the floor reinforced with wooden planks, the walls lined with faded insulation. It wasn't a T large, no more than 3 feet wide, but it was enough for a person to crawl through. Emily's husband cursed under his breath. This shouldn't even be here. But Emily stepped forward, her breath shaky but determined. She had to see. She had to know. The passage smelled of mildew and something faintly metallic. As they crawled deeper, their flashlight beams revealed scrawled notes taped to the walls, pages torn from notebooks, filled with Karen's handwriting. Some were observation logs. Others were strange diagrams, sketches of houses with X's marked where hidden spaces could be built. And then, at the end of the passage, they found a small room. It was crude, but deliberate. A folding chair sat before a wall that had been cut thin, so thin that anyone seated there could press an ear against it and hear everything in the room beyond. On the floor were empty food wrappers, a thermos, and another notebook. The realization struck like a lightning bolt. This wasn't just a cavity. It was a listening post. Someone had been here, living here, watching, listening. Emily's stomach lurched, and she nearly dropped the flashlight. "This is insane," her husband muttered, flipping through the notebook. She's been cataloging us, every detail, every fight, every private moment." Emily whispered what they were both thinking. Karen. When the Morgans revealed their discovery to the Garcias and Johnsons, the fragile alliance of terrified neighbors hardened into something else. Determination. They could no longer pretend this was paranoia or coincidence. The evidence was undeniable, and if the Morgans had a passage, how many others did too? The Johnsons went first. Mark, fueled by anger, tore apart the upstairs wall where he had found the hidden vent. Behind it, he discovered a second, narrower shaft that ran along the length of the house. Inside were wires. Cheap cameras strung together, all routed toward a hidden corner. It wasn't just one device. It was a network. The Garcias, emboldened, ripped open the suspicious wall in their basement. Their cavity wasn't just a corridor, it connected directly to another house. When Luis crawled through, he realized the passage led toward the McAllisters' property, Karen's house. Every hidden room, every hollow wall, every listening post was connected. It was a web, and Karen's house was the center. The realization sent a chill through all of them. This wasn't just spying. This was infrastructure. Karen had overseen the construction of the neighborhood when it was first developed, serving on the HOA from the beginning. Somehow, she had influenced the builders, or modified the houses afterward, to create these hidden networks. She hadn't just been watching them. She had been living among them, crawling through walls, listening, recording, waiting. The thought was unbearable. Fear turned to fury. The neighbors convened in secret, huddled in the Garcias' garage with the doors locked and blankets hung over the windows. They compared their discoveries, the notebooks, the cameras, the hidden corridors. With every piece of evidence, their outrage grew. "How long has she been doing this?" Emily demanded, her voice trembling with rage. "Since the beginning," Luis said. "She built this neighborhood on lies. She built it for herself." Mark slammed his fist on the workbench. "We can't live like this anymore. We can't let her control us." But the question remained. What could they do? Karen wasn't just a neighbor. She was the HOA president, with legal authority and influence. Reporting her might not be enough. And what if she knew already that they had found her secrets? The air in the garage was thick with tension. Every creak outside, every car passing by made them flinch. It felt as though Karen was already listening, already watching. And then came the moment that confirmed their worst fears. As the meeting ended and the neighbors prepared to leave, they found something wedged under the garage door, a single piece of paper. On it, written in neat handwriting, were the words, I know what you found." Beneath it, a smiley face. The revelation shattered any illusion of safety. Karen wasn't just spying on their homes, she had been spying on them in real time. She knew about their secret meeting. She knew they were on to her, and now she was taunting them. The neighbors scattered, fear etched into their faces. Each family retreated into their homes, locking doors that suddenly felt useless, sealing windows that no longer felt secure. But Emily Morgan didn't sleep that night. She sat in her living room, staring at the wall where the passage had been, her jaw set. Enough was enough. If Karen thought she could scare them into silence, she was wrong. They would expose her. The night after the note appeared beneath the Garcia's garage door, no one in Willow Creek slept soundly. The walls themselves seemed to breathe. Every creak of wood, every gust of wind through a vent, every hum of a pipe felt like an intruder pressing closer. Children clung to their parents, dogs barked at nothing, and couples whispered late into the night, debating whether to flee or fight. But by morning, a fragile consensus had formed. Fear had ruled them for too long. They could not go on pretending. They had to act. The plan. It was Mark Johnson who voiced what everyone had been thinking. "We have to see where it leads," he said, his voice low but steady. "All of it. The walls, the passages, the tunnels, they all connect back to her. If we don't expose it, she'll own us forever." Emily Morgan agreed, though her hands trembled as she spoke. "She already knows we've found things. There's no going back. If we wait, she'll destroy us piece by piece. But if we do this together—" Her eyes flicked between her neighbors. "She can't control all of us at once." Reluctantly, the Garcias nodded. So the plan was set. That night, after dark, they would open the passages again and follow them wherever they led. They would document everything with phones and cameras. And they would end it, one way or another. The crawl. At 10 o'clock sharp, with the neighborhood eerily quiet, the Morgans pried open the hole in their basement wall. Dust swirled as the narrow passage yawned open, its stale air spilling into the room. One by one, they crawled inside. Luis Garcia leading with a flashlight, Emily close behind, then Mark Johnson with his jaws set in grim determination. The tunnel twisted and turned, crude but deliberate. Handholds had been carved into the beams. In some places, worn planks showed where knees and hands had pressed over and over again. The realization hit them with nauseating force. Someone had been using this path frequently, comfortably, as though it were a second home. Along the way, they found more evidence: crushed cans of soda, candy wrappers, even a pillow stuffed into a corner. Someone hadn't just visited these tunnels. They had lived in them. And then came the first shock. The passage forked. One path veered toward the Garcia's house, the other sloped downward toward Karen's property. The choice was obvious. With hearts pounding, they pressed forward into the dark. Karen's house. The tunnel grew tighter as they neared Karen's home. The walls pressed close, the smell of mildew thickening until it clung to their clothes. Finally, they reached a wooden panel. Luis pressed his ear against it, listening. Nothing. He pushed. The panel swung inward, revealing a crawl space beneath Karen's house. At first, the space seemed unremarkable: dusty beams, pipes, wiring. But as they crept forward, their lights revealed something else entirely: rooms. Hidden rooms. Beneath Karen's immaculate, rule-perfect house was an entire warren of chambers carved out of the foundation. Each was small, barely tall enough to stand in, but they were organized with military precision. One room contained shelves stacked with notebooks and binders, everyone labeled with a family's name: Garcia, Johnson, Morgan, Patel, Henderson. Another room contained surveillance equipment: cheap cameras, recorders, batteries, all wired together with extension cords snaking toward the walls. Screens flickered with feeds, showing living rooms, kitchens, even bedrooms. And then there was the largest chamber. It was furnished, not just a hideout, but a living space. A cot, a desk, a lamp, a stack of neatly folded clothes. On the desk lay maps of the neighborhood, each house marked with red ink, tunnels and cavities drawn in meticulous detail. At the center of every map, circled in bold, was Karen's house. It was her lair. The confrontation. Emily's stomach churned. She's been living down here, watching us, listening, for years. Luis flipped through a binder labeled Morgan. His hands shook as he read aloud. Emily prefers decaf tea. Son naps at 1:30 sharp. Husband works late Tuesdays. Emily cries on phone with sister those nights. Emily's knees gave out, and she collapsed against the wall. It wasn't just spying. It was intimate, invasive, humiliating. Karen knew everything. Suddenly, a voice cut through the silence. You shouldn't be here. They froze. From the shadows at the far end of the chamber, Karen stepped forward. She was dressed not in her usual pastel cardigans, but in black, her hair pulled back, her expression cold. In her hand was a flashlight, its beam slicing through the dust. This is trespassing, she said calmly, though her eyes glimmered with something darker. You're violating HOA property. Luis's voice broke as he shouted, This isn't HOA property, Karen. This is insane. You've been spying on us, living in our walls. Karen tilted her head, almost pitying. Spying? No. Protecting. Guiding. You people don't understand what it takes to keep order, to keep a community safe, disciplined. Without me, this neighborhood would fall into chaos. Mark stepped forward, fists clenched. You're sick. You've been crawling through our walls like a rat, watching our kids, our families. Karen's lips curved into a small smile. And you obeyed, didn't you? Every time I fined you, every time I corrected you, you all obeyed. Because deep down, you knew. I knew what was best. Her calmness was more terrifying than rage. The shocking revelation. Emily forced herself to speak, her voice raw. Why? Why do all this? Karen's smile widened. She gestured at the binders, the maps, the screens. Because perfection doesn't happen by accident. You think order just emerges? No, it must be designed. Controlled. Every detail monitored, corrected, enforced. She stepped closer, her eyes glittering in the dim light. I built this neighborhood. I shaped it. And I shaped all of you. Every fight you had, every choice you made. I was there, guiding, nudging, correcting. Without me, you'd all be lost. The words hit like a thunderclap. Karen didn't see herself as a villain. She saw herself as a creator, a god of Willow Creek. Emily's stomach turned. You're insane, Karen's eyes hardened. No, I am necessary. The fight. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the chamber. Then Mark lunged. He grabbed Karen's arm, wrenching the flashlight away. The beam swung wildly, illuminating shelves, wires, binders. Karen screamed, not in fear, but in fury, and clawed at him. The room erupted in chaos. Luis tried to pin her down. Emily scrambled for the notebooks, clutching them to her chest. Karen thrashed, her strength shocking, her voice rising into a shriek. You don't understand. Without me, you're nothing. Nothing! The struggle crashed into the shelves, sending binders spilling across the floor. Cameras toppled, cords snapping, screens going black. The carefully maintained web of surveillance collapsed in a shower of sparks and dust. Finally, with sheer force, Mark shoved Karen to the ground and held her there, his chest heaving. For the first time, Karen looked small, her face twisted, her eyes wild. But even then, she whispered, you'll regret this. They always do. The aftermath. The neighbors called the police. They turned over the notebooks, the cameras, the binders, the maps. Officers spent hours combing through the hidden chambers, documenting every twisted detail of Karen's empire. The revelations rocked Willow Creek. Local news swarmed the neighborhood, cameras flashing, reporters demanding interviews. Headlines screamed about the HOA president of surveillance, the woman who turned a suburban dream into a nightmare. Karen was arrested, her face plastered across every screen. But even as she was led away in handcuffs, she carried herself with eerie calm. Her lips curled in the faintest smile. "You'll see," she murmured to Emily as she passed. "Without me, this place will rot." The legacy of fear. In the weeks that followed, Willow Creek struggled to recover. Walls were torn down, passages sealed, cameras destroyed. But the damage lingered. Families whispered at night, children refused to sleep alone, and every creak of the house brought back memories of breathing in the walls. The Garcias sold their home. The Johnsons filed for bankruptcy after years of fines. The Morgans stayed, but Emily never truly felt safe again. Because the truth was this: walls could be rebuilt. But the sense of safety, of privacy, of trust, it was gone forever. Karen's web had been dismantled, but the scars remained. And sometimes, late at night, Emily swore she still heard it, the faint sound of breathing in the walls,